be fine. So, the subtle art of not giving a fuck. This is the fifth session of reading, and here we are. Subtlety number 2. Here is where we left off. To not give a fuck about adversity, you must first give a fuck about something more important than adversity. Imagine you're at a grocery store and you watch an elderly lady scream at the cashier. Oh no, we have gone through this. I just remembered. The old lady at the store, yes, you can listen to this in the previous live session. Subtlety 3. Whether you realize it or not, you are always choosing what to give a fuck about. Okay? People aren't just born not giving a fuck. It's so funny. It's using this. Okay, I'll do it again. People aren't just born not giving a fuck. In fact, we're born giving way too many fucks. Ever watch a kid cry his eyes out because his hat is the wrong shade of blue? Exactly. Fuck that kid. When we're young, everything is new and exciting, and everything seems to matter so much. Therefore, we give tons of fucks. We give a fuck about everything and everyone, about what people are saying about us, about whether that cute boy, girl called us back or not, about whether our socks match or not, or what color our birthday balloon is. As we get older, with the benefit of experience and having seen so much time slip by, we begin to notice that most of these sorts of things have little lasting impact on our lives. Those people whose opinions we cared about so much before are no longer present in our lives. Rejections that were painful in the moment have actually worked out for the best. We realize how little attention people pay to the superficial details about us, and we choose not to obsess so much over them. Essentially, we become more selective about the fucks we're willing to give. This is something called maturity. It's nice. You should try it sometime. Maturity is what happens when one learns to only give a fuck about what's truly fuck-worthy. As Bang Moreland said to his partner detective McNulty in The Wire, which, fuck you, I still downloaded, quote, "That's what you get for giving a fuck when it wasn't your turn to give a fuck," unquote. Yo, Anaconda. Hi, Anaconda. And thanks for the like. Then, as we grow older and enter middle age, something else begins to change. Our energy level drops. Our identity solidifies. We know who we are and we accept ourselves, including some of the parts we aren't thrilled about. And, in a strange way, this is liberating. Another like, thank you, Kate. Thanks a lot. We no longer need to give a fuck about everything. Life is just what it is. We accept it, warts and all. We realize that we're never going to cure cancer or go to the moon or fill Jennifer Aniston's tits. And that's okay. Life goes on. We now reserve our ever dwindling fucks for the most truly fuck-worthy parts of our lives. Our families, our best friends, our Gulf Spring. And to our astonishment, this is enough. This simplification actually makes us really fucking happy on a consistent basis. And we start to think, maybe that crazy alcoholic Bukowski was onto something. Don't try. Right. Keep it up. Thanks, Anaconda. Yes, 50 heads. Okay. Keep up, man. Thanks. Pro remembers tomorrow. Oh, the fuck up, bro. Okay, whatever. So, Mark, next headline. So, Mark, what the fuck is the point of this book anyway? Okay, and for those who have just joined, it's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Number 1 bestseller A New York Times bestseller, yes, by Mark Manson. Okay. This book will help you think a little bit more clearly about what you're choosing to find important in life and what you're choosing to find unimportant. I believe that today we're facing a psychological epidemic, and he's right, one in which people no longer realize it's okay for things to suck sometimes. I know that sounds intellectually lazy on the surface, but I promise you it's a life or death sort of issue. Because when we believe that it's not okay for things to suck sometimes, then we unconsciously start blaming ourselves. We start to feel as though something is inherently wrong with us, which drives us to all sorts of overcompensation, like buying 40 pairs of shoes or downing Xanax with a vodka chaser on a Tuesday night or shooting up a school bus full of kids. Wow. Yeah, sometimes what I do is I just eat. Yeah, emotional eating. I'm not hungry, but I put that thing into my mouth. That's another way of coping with this, probably. When I don't accept that something is wrong, and it's okay that it's wrong, yeah. Let's say as a private tutor, I want more students, and I don't have them. I'm like, this is wrong. I'm not secure. I'm not safe. And worries start taking up my mental vision and energy and stuff, and I overeat or something. Okay, let's read your comments. This is a good bedtime story. Yes, Boeing Apache. This is, for some, it's painful, it's unpleasant, but it's truth and it can be very useful. And Willard says the long part in back don't make up for the bolt in front. Ah, okay. Yeah, I don't give a fuck about that, Willard. Your opinion doesn't count. Right. This belief that it's not okay to be inadequate sometimes is the source of the growing feedback loop. Feedback loop from hell that is coming to dominate our culture. The idea of not giving a fuck is a simple way of reorienting our expectations for life and choosing what is important and what is not. Developing this ability leads to something I like to think of as a kind of practical enlightenment. No, not that airy-fairy, eternal bliss, end of all suffering, bullshitty kind of enlightenment. On the contrary, I see practical enlightenment as becoming comfortable with the idea that some suffering is always inevitable. That no matter what you do, life is comprised of failures, loss, regrets, and even death. Well, I would say life contains those things, not just comprised of, might say. Because once you become comfortable with all the shit that life throws at you, and it will throw a lot of shit, trust me, you become invincible in a sort of low-level spiritual way. After all, the only way to overcome pain is to first learn how to bear it. This book doesn't give a fuck about alleviating your problems or your pain. And that is precisely why you will know it's being honest. This book is not some guide to greatness. It couldn't be, because greatness is merely an illusion in our minds, a made-up destination that we obligate ourselves to pursue, our own psychological Atlantis. Yeah, and yeah. Invincible in a spiritual way. I like this idea, he says, I'll read again. Once you become comfortable with all the shit that life throws at you, you become invincible in a sort of low-level spiritual way. I think my way of coping with this was to tell myself that everything is temporary, including life, and whatever bad stuff I'm going through is going to end anyway. So there's this Latin saying, memento mori, remember the death, yeah? And there you can be terrified of death, which is not helpful, or you can accept the fact that death is there anyway, and you're going to get there anyway, and whatever you go through now might be less important and less traumatic for you. This is something helpful, I think, when you just allow yourself to not give too much fucks, as Mark would have put it, and remind yourself that this journey is temporary, and whatever it be and full of drama right now will be something unimportant in either a year or a decade, or maybe a few decades. Yeah, okay, I think I'll move on. I'll read some more for you guys, okay? Instead, this book will turn your pain into a tool, your trauma into power, and your problems into slightly better problems. This is real progress. Think of it as a guide to suffering and how to do it better, more meaningfully, with more compassion and more humility. It's a book about moving lightly despite your heavy burdens, resting easier with your greatest fears, laughing at your tears as you cry them. Laughing at your tears as you cry them, okay? It's painful, but it can be also alleviating. This book will not teach you how to gain or achieve, but rather how to lose and let go. It will teach you to take inventory of your life and scrub out all but the most important items. It will teach you to close your eyes and trust that you can fall backwards and still be okay. It will teach you to give fewer fucks. It will teach you to not try. Don't try. Okay, I've got a problem with this. Maybe I'll understand this concept better. What he means by that, I don't think he means like just sit back and don't do anything. Probably just don't, in your mind, don't think of it as something crucial or super important. Maybe that's what he means. Okay, now we are getting to chapter 2, which says happiness is a problem. That's an interesting statement. Happiness is a problem. Let's read a little bit more, okay? About 2,500 years ago, in the Himalayan foothills of present-day Nepal, there lived in a great palace a king who was going to have a son. For this son, the king had a particularly grand idea. He would make the child's life perfect. The child would never know a moment of suffering. Every need, every desire would be accounted for at all times. I think this is the story of the Buddha. The king built high walls around the palace that prevented the prince from knowing the outside world. Yeah, that's the story of the Buddha, I'm sure. He spoiled the child, lavishing him with food and gifts, surrounding him with servants who catered to his every whim. And just as planned, the child grew up ignorant of the routine cruelties of human existence. All of the prince's childhood went on like this, but despite the endless luxury and opulence, the prince became kind of a pissed-off young man. Soon every experience felt empty and valueless. The problem was that no matter what his father gave him, it never seemed enough, never meant anything. So, late one night, the prince snuck out of the palace to see what was beyond its walls. He had a servant drive him through the local village, and what he saw horrified him. Yeah, this is the story of the Buddha, and I'll add one little part which seems to be missing here. They say that one night, oh yes, everyone surrounding the Buddha was young, and if people got older, they would put on a lot of makeup so that the Buddha wouldn't even know what old age is, you know. And they say one night after a party, people were asleep and the makeup was kind of getting their faces, or like distorted their faces. It was too much and it was like dripping or something like that. And the Buddha woke up and saw that, and it was one of his first glimpses of of the reality that was hidden from him. You know. Okay, let's move on. For the first time in his life, the prince saw human suffering. He saw sick people, old people, homeless people, people in pain, even people dying. Actually, yeah, I think what's missing here, he also saw some dead bodies, cadavers, and he asked his servant, "What is this?" And his servant told him, "It is death." And the Buddha asked, "Does this happen to everyone?" The servant said, "Yes." "Will this happen to me?" asked the Buddha. And the servant responded, "Yes." That was one of the eye-opening moments for the Buddha, according to the Buddhist tradition. The prince returned to the palace and found himself in a sort of existential crisis. Not knowing how to process what he'd seen, he got all emo about everything and complained a lot. And, as is so typical of young men, the prince ended up blaming his father for the very things his father had tried to do for him. It was the riches, the prince thought, that had made him so miserable, that had made life seem so meaningless. He decided to run away. But the prince was more like his father than he knew. He had grand ideas too. He wouldn't just run away. He would give up his royalty, his family, and all of his possessions and live in the streets, sleeping in dirt like an animal. There he would starve himself, torture himself, and beg for scraps of food from strangers for the rest of his life. The next night, the prince snuck out of the palace again, this time never to return. For years he lived as a bum, a discarded and forgotten remnant of society. The dog shit caked to the bottom of the social totem pole. And as planned, the prince suffered greatly. Okay, another addition. Actually, the Buddha was also married, and he confessed to his wife. Well, there are different traditions. Yeah, you can read or hear the same story in different ways. So in one of the stories, the Buddha was also married, and he also had a child, if I'm not mistaken, a daughter. And his wife and child were kind of holding him back, but his resolve was very powerful. He talked to his wife the night he wanted to run away, and he confessed everything. That's also not in the story. Okay. He suffered through disease, hunger, pain, loneliness, and decay. He confronted the brink of death itself, often limited to eating a single nut each day. Yeah. And there's a depiction of the Buddha, actually. If you just Google maybe Buddha skeleton, maybe you can see it. The Buddha, like very, very thin, so thin that his ribs, his skeleton, is practically visible. That depiction, we don't see it often, but it's out there, so you can Google it and see an image of the Buddha, which maybe you haven't seen before, you know? All right. A few years went by, then a few more, and then nothing happened. The prince began to notice that this life of suffering wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. It wasn't bringing him the insight he had desired. It wasn't revealing any deeper mystery of the world or its ultimate purpose. In fact, the prince came to know what the rest of us have always kind of known, that suffering totally sucks. And it's not necessarily that meaningful either. Yeah, I remember of Ayn Rand, actually. If you've heard of Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's best-selling novel, yeah, you might know her or you might have heard about the novel. And once a journalist asked Ayn Rand, because she suffered a lot as well, she was an immigrant who immigrated into the US from the former USSR, you know, and she was very poor. She did odd jobs. She did many things until she reached success, and her books were rejected by at least 12 publishers, you know. But she persisted. She rose up and she made a career for herself. She made a name for herself. She earned a fortune because the United States and free market capitalism can allow you to get there. Yeah, the land of opportunities, as they say. Okay, so Ayn Rand would agree with this concept that suffering was not noble. You know, it doesn't make you nobler. Because in some cultures, and even today in the political left, suffering is kind of revered, kind of almost worshipped. Like, oh, you suffer, oh, then you're so noble, so good. You're better than me if you're in pain and you're suffering. And of course, this tradition of masochism exists also in Christianity. So it was also part of the political right, and now it's also part of the political left. Okay, but let's get back to the book. As with being rich, there is no value in suffering when it's done without purpose. And soon the prince came to the conclusion that his grand idea, like his father's, was in fact a fucking terrible idea, and he should probably go do something else instead. Totally confused, the prince cleaned himself up and went and found a big tree near a river. He decided that he would sit under that tree and not get up until he came up with another grand idea. As the legend goes, the confused prince sat under that tree for 49 days. We won't delve into the biological viability of sitting in the same spot for 49 days, but let's just say that in that time the prince came to a number of profound realizations. One of those realizations was this, that life itself is a form of suffering. The rich suffer because of their riches. The poor suffer because of their poverty. The people without a family suffer because they have no family. People with a family suffer because of their family. People who pursue worldly pleasures suffer because of their worldly pleasures. People who abstain from worldly pleasures suffer because of their abstention. One more point. I'm not sure if this is very Buddhist when he says that life itself is a form of suffering. I'm not really sure, to be honest, because in Buddhism there are four noble truths. Yeah, the first one is that suffering exists, and the second one, if I remember correctly, is that it's possible to overcome suffering. So I'm not sure that the Buddhists would say that life is suffering in itself. A Buddhist, probably, I'm not one, so yeah. A Buddhist would have probably said there is suffering in life, and it is possible to overcome the suffering. And the third noble truth, if I'm not mistaken, in the Buddhism was the path leading to the liberation, yeah, leading to liberation from the suffering, the eightfold noble path. Yeah, so that sentence, life itself is a form of suffering, on page 25, I doubt its accuracy from the perspective of Buddhism. I doubt that they would have put it this way, actually. All right, let's move on. This isn't to say that all suffering is equal. Some suffering is certainly more painful than other suffering, but we all must suffer nonetheless. Years later, the prince would build his own philosophy and share it with the world, and this would be its first and central tenet, that pain and loss are inevitable and we should let go of trying to resist them. The prince would later become known as the Buddha, and in case you haven't heard of him, he was kind of a big deal. There's a premise that underlines a lot of our assumptions and beliefs. The premise is that happiness is algorithmic, that it can be worked for and earned and achieved as if they were getting accepted to law school or building a really complicated Lego set. If I achieve X, then I can be happy. If I look like Y, then I can be happy. If I can be with a person like Z, then I can be happy. This premise, though, is the problem. Happiness is not a solvable question. Dissatisfaction and unease are inherent parts of human nature and, as we'll see, necessary components to creating consistent happiness. The Buddha argued these from a theological and philosophical perspective. I will make this argument in this chapter, but I will make it from a biological and with pandas. Okay, I think that's it for today. This was very, very interesting. This is a good, yeah, okay, I read the comments, that's it. So guys, please like, okay, and you can also support me with a comment, and shares are also welcome. Super likes are also appreciated. So again, the book is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, and I like it, yes. And especially this part was kind of interesting and promising, yeah, the life story of the Buddha, and that suffering is inevitable. These are true. These things are real. And these things are helpful. You know, sometimes when I'm in pain for something, maybe I didn't have sex for a while, for instance, and I'm like, oh, I'd like to have sex with some handsome guy, yeah? And I sometimes tell myself, okay, I'm suffering right now. Okay, I accept the suffering. The thing is, our mind, it seems, tries to override that acceptance of suffering, and the mind is like, no, 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 seek for pleasure, seek for happiness, and we are trying to do that all the time, yeah? We eat to feel good, mostly, yeah, not to satisfy our hunger, because once we eat and we're not hungry, we still continue eating, yes, I'm snacking and stealing some little thing from the fridge or from the table. So it's not just about fulfilling some biological needs, yeah. But this chapter was pretty interesting. I'm happy I read it for you. I'm happy also for myself because I haven't read this book before, and right now I'm discovering it with you guys while reading it. I heard of this book. When was it published actually? Maybe a couple of years ago? Or it's even older? Oh, wow, wow, wow. 2016. It's not even that fresh, but still it's a best-selling book. Actually, it was translated into my native language, into Armenian, last year, if I'm not mistaken. So the book is still circulating, you know. Most probably, it means that there are some useful and valid and probably practical ideas in the book. So subscribe to my channel if you're not a subscriber, and I encourage you to also share my content on your social media to help your friends. You know, we all face different problems and issues, from migration to relationship issues and breaking up with the loved ones or losing a loved one, So this book can be very useful for a lot of people who are going through different problems in their lives. So your share could benefit someone. You could send this live to someone and tell them, if they are in pain, listen to this book, or read it at least, and that could be helpful to someone. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks a lot, and see you next time. High five to y'all, and have a good one. Bye bye.